Hi everyone, and welcome to my video. I'm so glad you're here. Today I'm going to be showing you the start to end process of how to create a custom postcard. These custom postcards feature modern calligraphy with hand-painted flowers, and though they're not standard product offerings of mine, I get requests every now and then from people who want to send something a little bit more special than just a greeting card or a letter. This is a great way to send someone not only a special note with customized words on it, but a piece of art they can frame and treasure. I love making these custom postcards, and today I hope I can show you just how I do it. One disclaimer I do want to give is that this video is very high level. I'm going to go through the steps pretty quickly. I don't really explain how to do calligraphy or how to do the painting. I just show you my process. If you have any questions that get a little bit more technical, or if you want a little bit more detail on my process, please leave me a comment below. I'm hoping I can make more videos like this. I want to help you get better at your craft, and I want to share more of my craft with you as well. I hope this does inspire you to want to go and craft something of your own. So let's get to it. So the paper that we're going to be using today is the Canson Watercolor Paper. I find that the grain of the paper is not too thick and toothy so that the calligraphy nib would get stuck in it, but it's textured just enough to hold the watercolor painting very well. And so when I'm doing a piece that involves both calligraphy inking as well as painting, this is the paper that I like to use. So when I'm using this paper or any other size paper, I first have to cut it down to the size that I want. For this postcard, we are going to match it to the envelope. So I am cutting my paper to fit the envelope, which is 4.25 by 5.5 inches, otherwise known as an A2 envelope. And this envelope and size is typically used for adding a detail or a RSVP card to a wedding invite. So this 9 by 12 sheet that I have here yields 4 sheets of the postcard size that I need, which is great in case I make any mistakes. I'll have some extra paper on hand. So now that our paper is ready and cut, I'm going to sit down and do some pencil sketches. My pencil sketching is very rough at this stage. I like to just grab any old notebook and draw out the rough layout and composition of what I'm going to do. The client has already chosen the words, so I know roughly that it's going to be probably 3 to 4 lines. And client has also requested that I paint some flowers. And so what I'm doing now is seeing what kind of layout I can work with. And it's looking like the best way to do this would be a landscape format. We can also do a portrait format, but because of the amount of words and the phrasing of the quote, I've chosen to go landscape with this for now. I also like to draw a few options for composition just to get a feel for how the flowers can frame the writing. One option is to have the flowers as the main focal point with the words on the side. And another option is to have the words as the main focal point and have the flowers coming in from the edges. So as you can see here, I'm just playing around with different layouts, trying to see what it would look like. And I think I'm gonna go with my top option with words in the center and the flowers on the edge. So once I have an idea of the layout, I like to measure out my piece of paper with a margin as well as lines to make sure that my calligraphy is going to be written in a straight line. What I like to do is I put my postcard on my cutting board, and today I'm going to be measuring out a 1-inch border around the edge of my postcard. This is to make sure that the words don't look too close to the edge, because the white space just makes everything look a lot more balanced. And then with the remaining space, what I'm going to do is divide it up so that 4 lines of text can fit on that page. This math is a little easy because we have about 2 inches and a little bit left. So I'm just dividing the piece into 1/2-inch lines and keeping the bottom of the postcard with a little bit more white space. This actually worked out well because it was so easy to divide up the lines, and having a bit more white space on the bottom looks a little more pleasing to the eye in my experience, because it kind of adds a little bit more weight to the bottom. And so overall things usually look a bit more balanced when there's a little bit more space at the bottom. You'll find this when you buy photos that are matted or different artworks. I usually find that the mat at the bottom of the frame is slightly larger. So now what I'm doing is I'm using my pencil again to do the words very lightly. Any pencil works. I usually make sure that the pencil I have can be erased by the eraser I have on the paper I have. Sometimes, for some reason, the pencil adheres really well to the paper, and so you can see faint pencil marks, but I know with experience that this pencil on this paper will come off quite easily at the end. So I can be confident that my rough draft is not going to stay on the final. And I'm actually going to revisit my sketchbook to do a higher fidelity draft of the flowers. It might look like I'm doing this very fast, but I already had an idea of the composition in my head, and I already knew what kind of flowers the client was looking for because she had responded to another painting I had done recently. So I'm kind of using that painting as a reference and using similar features of that to do this one. So even though I just finished drawing the flowers, I am actually going to go ahead and ink my letters before I do the flower painting. So in this video, I am using the Nikko G nib as well as sumi ink. The Nikko G nib is great for beginners because it's very stiff, and that means it's a lot easier to control. And I find that I don't have as many ink accidents when I'm using the Nikko G. I'm using an oblique pen holder here, and the oblique pen holder really helps, especially in the beginning, because modern calligraphy is done on an angle, and so the oblique pen holder actually helps us achieve that angle more dramatically so that we don't have to compensate so much with our arm or our wrist. So I have a larger pack of sumi ink that I have just poured into this little jar. And before I do my strokes, I like to do a few little test strokes just to make sure I don't have any big blobs of ink waiting in the nib for me, because that is just an accident waiting to happen. I usually make a lot more mistakes in the calligraphy than the painting. Painting is a lot more forgivable for me just because of the medium I'm using, and the flowers I'm drawing are very simple. What's harder is to fix calligraphy. If there is some sort of ink accident, it's a lot harder to cover that up. And so I like to make sure that the text is perfect before I proceed in doing any of the other artwork. You can see here that it's really nice that I have a pencil sketch to go off of. I used to do my pencil sketches with a lot more precision because I was a lot more confident about my skills and my ability to do natural calligraphy. But after many years of doing it, I only need to go off a rough pencil sketch now because I have an idea of how large my letters are going to be and how I'm going to space it and connect it all together. And so having just a rough layout allows me to get a gauge, but I use my ink to do a much more precise line than my pencil, as you can see here. Now this watercolor paper is very absorbent, again, which is why I like using it because I'm going to be painting over it. But for this ink, it actually absorbs a lot of ink, and so I find I am dipping my pen a lot more into my ink jar than I would if I was writing on more proper calligraphy paper. All right, we are done now. So at this point, we need to wait for the ink to dry. This doesn't take longer than 3 minutes usually because the ink dries very fast as long as there aren't any big puddles of ink. I like to make sure that the ink is dry with my finger, and then I go ahead and erase all my lines. I don't really need these lines for the flowers, and so I like having a clean blank canvas before I do my flower painting. I think the worst part of doing these calligraphy jobs is the erasing. I really hate erasing. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of arm strength, but it's making me stronger. All right, now for the fun part. So the paint I'm using today is the Winsor Newton gouache. The paintbrushes I'm using today are small watercolor brushes that have a round tip. I like using stiffer brushes because it allows me to have more precise line work. So I know my basic color palette for today. I'm just squeezing out a little bit of the paint colors that I know I'll need. I'm using the lid of a takeout container, as you can see here. It's really great to reuse plastic like this if you can. We definitely wash everything and keep it for projects like this. We've also used some of our takeout containers to plant little house plants, so they're very useful, and the lids especially are great for palettes. You don't have to go out and buy a plastic palette if you have these reusable plastic takeout containers. So now I'm gonna mix my colors. I added a little bit of yellow into my pink because I want my piece to look very warm, and I like the orangey corally color more than just the straight up baby pink. And this is gonna be the color of my main flower. So for the painting, I'm actually not doing a rough pencil sketch. I'm freehanding it based on the rough draft that I did. If it's not exact, it's okay. And this is why I like doing the words first, because I know that the painting can just frame the words, and as long as I'm not going into the words, I know that I will be okay and it will be pretty even and symmetrical. I love these brushes with a fine tip, these round watercolor brushes, because it allows you to control the pressure of your hand and make these tapered flower petals just from the pressure of your hand rather than painting it all in. You can see my water is also a takeout container. It's great for reusing. And now I'm just mixing the green for the leaves. I like to use a bit of yellow in the green as well if I'm using yellow in the flower to match the tones a little bit more. I also like using the red in the greens because it gives it more of a browner, desaturated type of color, which is exactly what I'm going for. I find that if the greens are too vibrant, it competes with the flower. So I like to dull them out a bit so that the flower really pops. I'm not a color expert. My color theory is pretty weak, so I am sorry if I am using the wrong terminology or if my reasons don't make sense. Let me know if anything I've said is just straight up wrong, or if there's a better way for me to explain this, or if you have any tips. So I also like to do variations of leaves, some big, some small, and also slightly different colors, because I find that it adds so much more dynamic to my flower pieces. So what I'm doing now is the first layer. So I do the primary flowers with the base leaves to give it the structure it needs, and then I'm gonna go over and add more embellishments. So shading, smaller flowers, smaller leaves. But right now I just wanna make sure my main composition and my main pieces are looking balanced. I like to just keep adding leaves until things are beginning to look more full and balanced, and then I'll move on to do a different flower or a different leaf color. So now I'm going in with a darker red to do similar flower shapes but in smaller size. And these little flowers do a really good job of kind of filling in the space of a blank canvas. Again, these paintbrushes are great to draw leaves because, as you can see, I don't have to color in the leaves, but because of the tapering of the paintbrush, I can just apply pressure and it gives me that very thick body of the leaf. And it's very similar to calligraphy. I do calligraphy with this type of watercolor brush all the time because, again, it's just working with the pressure of your hand to achieve the thicker downstrokes. and the thinner upstrokes. Alright, time to do a new leaf shape. So because all of our leaves are so rigid and pointy, I thought I would include something softer and rounder. I am going in with this lighter shade of green to make these bigger leaves here, hopefully to give it some more bulk. So as you can see, I'm just playing around, adding little pieces as I go, adding more leaf structures to it until it looks very, very full. I also decided to add a little bit of dark blue because I thought it would be a great pop of color. I'm carrying in some of that darker red that I made to paint in my bigger flower pieces. This kind of makes the bouquet look a lot more cohesive, makes it look like they're in the same kind of family. The nice thing about gouache is that when it dries, it's quite easy to go over very dark colors with a lighter color. So here I'm drawing in the little dots of yellow to give it a little pop and detail. Sometimes I even go in with white paint after on a darker surface, and I find that the gouache is very good, especially if you buy higher quality gouache. It will give you a much more opaque look. So now that the final details of the painting are almost done, I am going to go in with some gold ink. I have this metallic palette, I will link it below, and it has a few shades of gold and silver, and I find that this ink palette is just so shimmery. The pigment is so nice, and the way I use it is I just dip a clean paintbrush into water. You just need a little bit of water, and once you add it to the pigment, it just releases this really beautiful gold, and you can apply this to your nib and use it for gold calligraphy, or as I'm doing right now, you can just use your paintbrush and add little gold details at the end, and this really makes your piece pop. This is probably my favorite part. I am just going over some of the little details in my leaves and flowers. Look at that shine. Amazing. This gold is just such a quick and simple trick, but it completely elevates your work and it makes it look so custom, so handmade, and it's just a little sparkle of delight. So now we're visiting my envelope collection, and as you can see, I have a bunch of different envelopes that I have from past weddings and samples. I have selected a few of the colors that I think match, and I'm basing it off of my flower illustration. I want the colors to be carried through from the illustration. I think I've landed on these 4 envelopes as my final favorite. What I'm using to do the envelope addressing now is a little guide that I made. I actually cut out a piece of cardstock to match the size of my envelope, and I've made sure that the window aligns to the middle of the envelope, which is where I want my text to be. I also included a little guideline to show where the center of the envelope is, and I find that this is enough for me to go in with my pencil and do a very quick lettering of the name. Again, this pencil can easily be erased after you ink the envelope. And today I am using Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. This is my favorite white ink. It used to come in kind of a jelly form, but it has dried out over the years. I find that this is the most opaque white ink I can find. A lot of other white inks tend to be a little bit see-through. This one just gives it such a strong, vibrant white color. And so I have clean water now. I'm gonna dip my paintbrush in it and then put a little bit of water in this white ink to loosen it up a bit. You only need a little bit, and then I have a clean tray here. I'm gonna dilute it until it is a nice consistency. You want it to be not too runny, but not too thick either, because you do want it to flow out from your nib. So now I'm just using my paintbrush to paint my nib, and this will allow me to write with white ink. And this is the same process you can use with the gold ink as well. I was painting gold with my paintbrush, but again, you can paint the gold paint onto your nib and then write with gold ink as well. All right, time to go in with my white ink. This is nothing different than writing with black ink. I usually do the same pace, same techniques, it's just a different color. I find white ink on darker envelopes are so stunning because the words just pop. And white ink calligraphy, there's just something kind of magical about it that I really love. And so I always like to go for the darker, more vibrant envelopes because it gives me an excuse to write with white ink. All right, the final piece is done. So we are finished for today. This is how I do my custom postcard. When I packaged this up for my client, I actually just added in a little wax seal to match. It's a great way to send someone a very custom note, especially if you can't find a greeting card that says what you want it to say at the front. I hope this video has inspired you to go create something for someone today. And until next time, happy crafting!